Okay, continuing here along the highway of learning in the Congress module, we're going to begin with slide number 26. And you can see that picture there. That's a picture of an example of gerrymandering, okay? So the party that controls the state legislature typically redraws the boundaries in a way that favors the candidates of its party, okay? That's something called gerrymandering after Eldridge Gerry, okay, who was a congressman and was also, I believe, a governor. And so basically this was created in his particular state to favor, his party, okay? And again, politicians do it all the time. In Illinois, where I hailed from before moving back to Michigan, the Democratic Party has controlled the House there in that state for 35 years, and they are masterful at redrawing districts to favor their party. In other words, if you want to know why does a state stay Democratic or Republican or whatever, a lot of it is because of that redistricting. They try to redraw them to favor their candidates in such a way that they just keep winning. It's really, really hard to oppose them, okay? And so there's all kinds of different ways to redistrict there. You can see in slide number 27. You can do it what's called bipartisan, okay? So you protect the incumbents of in both parties, okay? But that doesn't always happen because obviously self-interest kicks in. Example 2 there, it's an unstable system. All districts have the same number of supporters in each party. Usually it's example 3, okay? Where you get these weird shapes because again, the dominant party is trying to redistrict or trying to shape the districts rather in a way that's going to continually favor them. Okay, so the next few slides give you examples of quirky shapes in states based on gerrymandering. Okay, this is, if you go to slide number 28, this is Maryland's 3rd district. This is called the praying mantis. It supposedly looks like a praying mantis. I don't see it, but anyway, but you can see, you're like, okay, why wouldn't they be like squares or something like that, or rectangles? Okay, why is that weird shape? Again, favoring their district, okay? If you go to Michigan's 5th district, again, you can see where, that district goes, it starts in the north near Jacksonville and kind of heads south towards Orlando. I mean, that's a huge piece of land, but again, it's just a sliver there, okay? You see slide number 30, Pennsylvania's 7th district. This is called Goofy Kicking Donald Duck. Okay, now that's obviously a lot easier to see. Okay, strange sizes. And then Illinois' 4th district in slide number 31, that was a district where I resided in. Okay, I was more toward the center of the state there. But it's just a strange looking shape. But again, all of that is an attempt of legislators to keep their particular party in power. Okay, so let's look at a couple of Supreme Court cases, actually 3, that deal with redistricting. Okay, one case was Baker versus Carr. Okay, again, why these are interesting, again, in particular, Baker versus Carr, is because at issue here is, okay, the Constitution says that state legislatures are supposed to create the districts. It's not the job of the courts to weigh in. Okay, in 1962, the court weighed in. Okay, and this was a case involving Charles Baker and other Tennessee citizens who alleged that a 1901 law that was designed to apportion seats for the state's General Assembly was virtually ignored. Okay, his suit detailed how many Tennessee reapportionment efforts ignored significant economic growth and population shifts in the state, in other words, they stayed the same. Why? Well, because to favor that particular district. Okay, so the issue for the court was this: does the Supreme Court have jurisdiction over questions of legislative apportionment? Okay, they never had done this prior to this. Okay, but this court was led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, and this was considered a very activist court that got involved in a lot of issues that many people felt like they should have never got involved in. And so the decision in the case, if you see it on slide number 33, is they held that legislative apportionment is a justiciable issue. In other words, they said that if there are inequities in districts, and we're going to find this out because of perhaps race or some other issues, they said the court can get in there, okay? It's the court Many people look at the court as, okay, the fox guarding the hen house. Okay, is that it's like the fox can set the rules for how it guards the hen house, and this was one of those cases that again was very controversial. But again, the court started stepping in issues of apportionment. Okay, if you go to slide number 34, you see a case called Westbury versus Sanders. Okay, this was a case that involved James Westbury Jr., who filed a lawsuit against the governor of Georgia, and he protested the state's apportionment scheme. He said that the 5th congressional district, of which Westbury was a member, had a population 2 to 3 times larger than some of the other districts in the state. And he said that diluted his right to vote. Now, that is a very legitimate issue. Okay, again, the way apportionment was set up, again, in the Constitution, you'll get 1 rep for every 30,000 members. Okay, and again, since the 1930s, it's been fixed at the current state of 435. Okay, because again, the thinking is there's no way you had a representative 1 for every 30,000 in America, or you'd have a Congress of 10,000 people, and it would be a rambunctious, emotional, group. You wouldn't make good decisions that way. It'd be a crowd making decisions. Not going to work. Okay. But nevertheless, it begs the question, is it fair if you live in a district that's 3 times larger than the other districts in your state? Does your vote count as much? Does your voice count as much? Okay, technically it does not. So it went before the court, and the court held, if you see there on slide number 35, it held that Georgia's apportionment scheme grossly discriminated against voters in the 5th congressional district, because a single congressman had to represent 2 to 3 times as many people as were represented by congressmen in other districts. The Georgia statute contracted the value of some votes and expanded the values of others. Okay, the court recognized that no right is more precious than that of having a voice in elections, and to say that a vote is worth more in one district than in another would not only run counter to our fundamental ideas of democratic government, it would cast aside the principle of a House of Representatives elected by the people. So in other words, they said these districts have to be equal as much as you can in populations, or else you're violating democratic principles. Okay, in case Shaw versus Reno, this dealt with a racial concern. Okay. So if you go to slide number 36, you'll see this, okay? The U.S. Attorney General rejected a North Carolina congressional reapportionment plan because the plan created only 1 black majority district. North Carolina submitted a second plan creating 2 black majority districts. One of these districts was in parts no wider than the interstate road along which it stretched. 5 North Carolina residents challenged the constitutionality of this unusually shaped district, alleging that its only purpose was to secure the election of additional black representatives. So here's the question before the court. Did North Carolina's residents, their claim that the state created a racially gerrymandered district, raise a valid constitutional issue under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause? Okay, so here's what the holding of the court was in slide number 37. The court held that although North Carolina's reapportionment plan was racially neutral on its face, the resulting district shape was bizarre enough to suggest that it constituted an effort to separate voters into 2 different districts based on race. The unusual district, while perhaps created by noble intentions, seemed to exceed what was reasonably necessary to avoid racial imbalances according to equal protection claims. Okay, so again, you can't create districts that'll favor one race or another. Okay, you have to make sure that again, everyone is equally represented, and that district doesn't favor one race over the other. Okay, in this case, it was favoring blacks over whites. Okay, they were trying to make sure that it was equal in some way, shape, or form. Again, just some background here on redistricting and how that all works. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Slide number 38 here, talking about some of the pitfalls of incumbency. Again, remember, incumbents are the congressmen that are currently in office. Okay, what hurts them for re-election if there's a very disruptive issue? Oh, I don't know, like COVID-19 or many of the racial issues we're having in our country right now in 2020. Could that affect an incumbent? Sure, it could. Okay. There's if there's a lot of voter anger in some way, shape, or form, that could be a risk for an incumbent. Another risk is very simple, your character. If there's some form of personal misconduct, that could hurt your chances. Again, the framers presumed a moral and a virtuous citizenry and a moral and a virtue group of politicians. It's both. And obviously, if there's misconduct issues, that can affect you, okay? Go to slide number 39. Another pitfall of incumbency is the turnouts at midterm elections, okay? In other words, this year is a major election year because you're electing a president. So the national interest is going to be high. So by virtue of that, any congressman voting for office, running for office right now, interest in what that congressman doing is higher now than in the midterm election in 2022, where people are kind of like, oh, I don't know. I'm not really that interested in it. Again, nothing captures the Americans' attention like a presidential election. Nothing kind of lulls them into kind of a complacency and indifference than a midterm election, okay? And so that's when, in other words, if you were going to run for Congress, the time to run is in a midterm election. Okay, because that's when that incumbent is going to be the weakest, okay? And so, in 21 of the last 25 midterm elections, those that occur midway through a president's term, the president's party has actually lost House seats. Okay, you saw this in 2010 with Barack Obama. You saw some of that in 2012 with Trump, although he's gained some. It just depends. I mean, this year it'll be really interesting to see what happens. The Republicans lost the House of Representatives in 2018. Okay, so you see that happen there. Okay, so that's when an incumbent is weak. Other pitfalls of incumbency. Slide number 40. Primary election challenges. Okay, primaries. Okay, when you're voting before the general election for a particular individual. Okay, that's when they can be weaker. Okay. They're a time of risk for moderate candidates in the wake of strong challengers. So, in other words, in these primaries, you'll have a Republican primary or a Democratic primary, okay? And in that primary election, if you are seen as soft on a lot of issues, a more radical individual within that party many times can kind of win that election, okay? So they got to be realized that you got to realize that, okay? I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to begin with slide number 41 next.